start to find new methods, new cinematic grammar, new ways to represent image and films, new ways to communicate with their spectator. But they end up only in repeating old styles throughout basically 4 main techniques, which are the pastiche. It is a technique that imitates previous works, most of the time for celebrating previous works. The second technique is parody, which refers to previous works to mock them and not to celebrate them. Irony, irony, it's kind of representing contradictions. And within this postmodernist film, these contradictions reaches also the films themselves, the classical films and modernist films themselves. And finally, the 4th technique, which is the simulacra, the very famous example by Baudrillard. You know Baudrillard. So it is a kind of representing a reality in a distorted way, to the extent that it is eroded or it is erased. So these are the 4 main techniques that postmodernism represents. So the question, after having general idea about the 3 main trends in the cinematic history, the question is that, can we as Moroccans contribute in transcending this saturation? So that was my problematic issue. That was my question and answer. So first, to answer this question of the saturation, we should first understand the logic and the function of each trend. You cannot transcend these trends or these philosophies unless you know how they work and how they function. So now, back to the classical genre. The problem is in the suitor system. So I will just give an idea about what does the suitor system mean. It means simply suitor, it brings into our mind the suitor surgery. عملية جراحية, the suitor surgery. It suggests the same thing. When you bring images together, when you juxtapose images together, it is a kind of suitor system. So you see? So you put these images together. Why? Because you want your spectator to understand better your story throughout several other things, such as the heroism, to entertain the spectator, the linearity. So the story should be understood, should follow a certain causality. So there is a kind of the beginning, the climax, and then the solution. And these are the main characteristics of the suitor system. And the suitor system is used particularly by this classical cinema. What is the problem for me with this suitor system? So why, as a Moroccan film director, why not using this system? Why? Because this system is accused of being very ideological. Of course, as we have said yesterday, we cannot escape ideology. The way I'm wearing, or the way I'm talking, the way we are sitting now, everything in this world is ideological. But here it's a little bit different, because it involves the identification of the spectator. So you represent these images to be understood, to communicate with your spectator, and to influence her or him, to convince her or him with certain ideas. So it is a kind of involving the spectator within the sign itself, if we borrow from the semiotic field. So, you know the sign consists of the signifier and the signified, you know the story of de Saussure and Jacques Derrida and so on. So the signifier that is the things that are seen or learned or touched, the concrete things, becomes the spectator. And the signified, which is the mental concept, becomes the image or the film itself. So the whole process here involves the spectator to be a crucial element within this identification that was it was a research of Jacques Lacan and psychoanalyst theories. And this notion of identification, it is just what Jacques Lacan has said in his article, The Marriage Stage. It is a kind of when the child at a certain stage looks at his or her image on the mirror, he starts knowing herself or himself, especially from a libidinal point of view. So it is a kind of process to shape the personality of that child. In like manner, in suitor system, it plays the same role. It's practiced as a kind of a process to make the spectator, to shape the spectator and to construct the spectator's idea. So these are for modernist film directors. This was very serious. Why? Because for them it led to the two world wars. Because, for example, if we give the example of this film, the Birth of the Nation by Griffith. So this is very suggestive film because it is the example of the suitor system. It represents the blacks, the African Americans as savage, and the whites, the Anglo-Saxon whites, they are represented in this film as heroes. And there is a kind of duel, there is a kind of conflict between the whites and the African Americans, which ends because throughout the story there is a kind of besiege to a white woman, a white girl, and the whites will rescue this white girl. So there is a kind of a duel, and by the end of the film, the spectator is shaped against the African Americans. Why? Because the film suggests a kind of one-dimensional perspective, suggests a kind of linearity, suggests a kind of identification. So all of us are manipulated by this system. So, in general, to sum up the things concerning the suitor system, so it highlights linear narratives, continuity, heroism, the dual, and an understood story. All these tenets or all these characteristics consist or come together to form a kind of objectivity. Because when you watch this movie is supposed to give you objective things. This is why we cry when we watch a film. This is why we laugh when we watch Charlie Chaplin, for example. This is why we psychologically interact with these films. This is the reason why. Then, this objectivity suggests another thing, which is reality. So the things is interacted with the notion of realism. So these films consider that there is a reality over there, which is objective, and we should believe in that objective, all of us. Now, do you understand the problem with the suitor system? Now, we are going to understand the other system, which is the modernist, non-conventional system. So, the modernist genres flourishing during and after the two world wars, they understood this theater system, and they want to deconstruct this theater system and to go beyond this system, to come with something new and to make cinema benefit from this new approach. So cineasts like, for example, Louis Buñuel, Jean-Louis Godard, Pier Paolo Pasolini, Fellini, Vittorio De Sica, Roberto Rossellini, Visconti Lucchino, etc. All these very famous, renowned film directors try to find something new, because they accuse the social system of being one of the reasons behind the war, as I have said, since it influences the spectator by certain extremist ideologies. So what is the solution for these film directors? First of the things, they abandon the objectivity, because they know that the objectivity is the core of the theater system. The objectivity is the main mechanism of this system. So we should first disrupt this mechanism, to abandon it in order to reconstruct, to find another system which is workable and beneficial for cinema. So, by adopting this modernist mode, they found in phenomenology and existentialism their pursuit. So, the story begins with Edmond Husserl, who is the founder of the phenomenology. So, to understand this philosophy, I will just give you an example by a mobile. So all of us, we consider that this is a mobile. Why? Because we are told first that this is a mobile. We learn from our parents, from the media, from our friends, from our society, from all the people and the things surrounding us, that this is a mobile. So we accept it as a mobile. This is a given fact. It is given to us. For Edmond Husserl, he says we should not deal with the mobile this way. We should involve two main things in our determination to the mobile. First of the things, we should use our conscience. And second, the intention. So the intention and the conscience. How? So I will use my conscience, my personal, my individual conscience, with an intention, and try to understand this mobile without interfering any objective factors such as society, religion, media, or any other thing. Which means, for example, me, if I use only my intended conscience, I will not see in this piece of plastic a mobile, but maybe a gun, maybe a musical instrument, maybe a remote control. So this is the idea to explain the philosophy of phenomenology, is to have personal ideas and definition vis-à-vis the objects over there. So the main things that Husserl emphasizes on is the notion of bracketing. He says that we should bracket, which means we should put aside religion, historicity, idealism, positivity, structuralism, nationalism, all the things that teach us objectivity. We should put all these things, we should put them aside, we should bracket them and put them there, doing without them. Then, Jean-Paul Sartre, who is an existentialist. So existentialism came after phenomenology to emphasize this idea of subjectivity, this idea of personal way of thinking, personal definition towards everything around us. So if Husserl emphasizes the notion of bracketing, Sartre emphasizes two other notions, which are the notions of the bad faith and the good faith. If you ask anybody in the streets, what is the good faith? They will say to believe in God, to do this, to do this, to do this. But for Sartre, it's the contrary. The good faith is to believe in yourself. The good faith is to have a personal, a subjective way towards things. And the bad faith is the religion, the objectivity, the mainstreams, positivism, and all the other objective beliefs and concepts. Again, there's another existentialist who is very famous, Martin Heidegger. He insists on this notion of subjectivity also. And he calls the subjectivity as an authentic thing, authenticity, which is authentic, because it stems from me, from my conscience, from my intentions, not given to me. And the objectivity he calls inauthentic, because it is given to me already. Okay? Do you understand these concepts? So, there is another existentialist who influences the modernist cinema, the modernist trends in cinema, who is Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer had the same idea when he emphasizes the notion of the will vis-à-vis the mind. To understand this dichotomy of the will and the mind, we should first understand what is the mind. What does Schopenhauer mean by the mind? So the mind is a notion constructed by idealist philosophers, especially Descartes, Hegel, and Kant. These are the idealists or the idealist philosophers. So these idealists consider the mind as spiritual, as the essence, which means before the existence there is an idea which is abstract, which is idealist, which is immaterial, non-material idea. And then this spirit or spiritual mind or essence generates the material reality. For the existentialists like Schopenhauer, he reversed the concept and sees the will has something to do with the subjectivity, has something to do with the concrete needs, with the material needs of the person. This is why he highlights will over the mind. So all these phenomenological and existentialist ideas are stemmed from a book by Nietzsche, which is called Thus Spoke Zarathustra. In this book, it is a novel-like piece of writing. He starts with the return of Zarathustra. You know Zarathustra? He was a prophet. So Zarathustra returned from a cave where he was worshipping and says that God has died. So the death of God suggests the death of subjectivity, the death of religion, the death of all so these are the main philosophy from which the existentialists and the phenomenologists, modernists in general, stem their ideas. This is why you find in this film there is no narrative, so there is a kind of fragmentation, there is a kind of plunging within time, there is a kind of communicating throughout the image and not throughout the narrative, and there is no heroism in these films. Because they say it's better to speak about my own personal experience, and that film director considers himself or herself as not a hero. So you can understand how they deconstruct all the objective classical way of thinking. So now how, for me as a Moroccan, what shall I do to follow the classicist objectivity? also follow the modernist subjectivity. So this is a problem for me. Then I should understand myself as a Moroccan, because if I want to define the Moroccan culture, it consists of Phoenician culture, Jewish culture, Muslim culture, Amazigh culture, Arab culture. It's a kind of mosaic culture. So, can these two main theories manifest my culture? For me, it's no. This is why I was looking for the Moroccan Fusai set, and I found in this Fusai set the answer, because it transcends the notion of the censor, it transcends the notion of one-dimensionality, and it highlights the diversity. So when you look to a certain circle, your eyes slips to another circle and to another one and to another one. It is a kind of dynamism within this Fusai. So for me, objectivity and subjectivity should function to go together, to consist, to form, to shape this Fusai. And I support this idea by the NDA system, because everybody of us has some chromosomes coming from his or her parents and ancestors. But yes, there is a kind of modification. Because, for example, in Mirabe, I'm not only my parents, I'm not only my ancestors, but also there are personal things. So the ADN suggests this, if we can see the interrelation between the objectivity and subjectivity. And this is how I end up by the helical method in filmmaking. Sorry for making it very long, and if you have any questions after that, I'm ready to answer.
Well, thanks a million, Xavier, for this very, very dense, theoretically speaking and philosophically speaking presentation. And I just thank you again for showing us that research skills is not only about technical matters, but it's also about some very, very dense issues relating to philosophy, to culture, to religion, to history, etc., etc. So, of course, during the discussion session, you may ask the speakers your own questions or express your own feedback. Now, I'm going to Dr. Idris Baha, who was also once a master's student in this program, and of course, who earned a PhD from Beni Mellem University. His talk will be on research methodology in social sciences. So please, Idris, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Moshe. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Nasheed and Mr. Saeed Azmat for their initiative to gather us in this scholarly event. And I would like to thank all the professors of the Master's Program Communication in Context and all the professors of the English department and all the students as well. And thank you very much for your attendance and your attention as well. Thank you very much. My presentation is about research methodology in social sciences. The outline of my presentation is, I will start with an introduction. I will speak about positivism versus interpretivism as two paradigms from which quantitative and qualitative researches are known, and quantitative and qualitative research methods as well, mixed methods, research design, sampling, instruments, and then validity and reliability, and then conclusion. As you know, methodology is one of the most important chapters in research, among other parts which are review of it, findings, discussion of the findings, and or interpretation and conclusion. Methodology, it's all about two things: the how and the what. Concerning the how, in the methodological part, you tell your reader how you are approaching your research. What are the methods you are going to use, And why are you going to use some methods but not some others? The second thing you focus on is the what. You tell your reader what exactly you are going to do throughout your research and what are the methods you use to collect your data. Because the choice of our research methodology determines your research design, which is a very important part in your research as well. It determines your research design, which is a plan and a procedure of your research. It tells you what to do and what not to do throughout your research. Methodology has been defined by many scholars. There's a lot of definitions, one of which is the following by Saxford 2006. As I said, basically, methodology determines your research design. That is a plan and a procedure of your research. The way you approach your research can sometimes be based on certain paradigms and theories. And there are two major opposites, but I would say even though they are opposite, but they are complementary paradigms in how these paradigms and how these theories work. The first one is positivism, and the second one is interpretivism, or what is called naturalism. For in positivism, concerning the positivism or the positivist paradigm, the researcher is considered a scientist. The researcher tries to test the hypothesis via experiments, measurements, correlations, statistical logic, etc. It is a theory testing approach. An example of a hypothesis in the positivist paradigm is violence on media, for example, leads to juvenile violence. These two variables, we assume, according to this paradigm, that the more violence audiences are exposed to, the more violence they become. And the less violence they are exposed to, the less violent they become. That is to say, there is a correlation between these two variables. You assume that there is a correlation, and you test the hypothesis, and then you come up with the findings. The variables increase and decrease together. It depends on whether the correlation is high, low, or moderate between the two variables. On the other hand, interpretivism. In interpretivism or naturalism, the researcher is not a scientist, but I would say a detective. He tries or she tries to explore, to find out, to try to understand through observations, interviews, analytic approaches, etc. It is an inductive, theory-building approach. If the first approach is hypothesis testing, this approach is a theory building. An example of a question that can be addressed is, in the same issue, what are the causes of juvenile violence? For positivists, they start with a hypothesis and they try to test it and then come up with either they reinforce or they substantiate the hypothesis or they refute it. But concerning the interpretivism, they start with a question and they start to understand and find out and explore. And from this, we can speak about the quantitative and the qualitative research methods. Because of time constraints, I will not be able to elaborate on both enough, but I will limit myself to just quantitative research methods, which can be categorized into experimental and non-experimental research designs. In experimental research designs, we speak about the cause and effect relationship between variables. That is to say, variable one causes variable is the cause of the other variable, and it exists in hard sciences in which the researcher controls the independent variable. But in non-experimental research designs, the researcher does not control the independent variable, and if a relationship exists between variables at the beginning, it's too early to say that it's a cause and effect relationship, but other correlations may come to the fore. Non-experimental research designs again can be categorized into two: correlation research and causal comparative. The hypothesis we saw in a few is in a correlation research. Here, the researcher tries to investigate the relationship between the two variables. He tries to identify the scores of one variable just from the scores of the other variables. Variables increase and decrease together. If the variables covary, if one variable increases, the other one increases as well. Or if one variable decreases, the other one decreases. This is a positive correlation between the two variables, or more. But when they are negatively correlated, when one variable increases, the other one decreases. As, for example, the more violence you are exposed to on media, the more violent you become. In a causal comparative research design, it tries to identify, tries to examine the relationships between the research groups. For example, variable A influences variable B. This influence can be unidirectional. Variable A influences variable B, but not the opposite. Variable B does not influence variable A. Or it's bidirectional. Variable A influences variable B, and so does variable B. They influence each other. Concerning briefly a sketchy trajectory of the qualitative research method, they started towards the mid of the 20th century, and they thrived mainly in the 1960s and 1970s with the emergence of the ethnographic study. Some considered qualitative research as an alternative to the quantitative research, and some said that they complement each other, which is true, and that the debate between the two, quantitative-qualitative, has resulted in the emergence of the mixed methods research, which means mixing both the quantitative and the qualitative research in one analytic study by relying on each of these methods' strong points to yield a solid piece of research. According to the literature, there are maybe about 40 mixed methods research designs, but the most commonly used ones are only 6. When you mix the qualitative and the quantitative research design, you come up with only 6 are the most commonly used mixed methods research design. 3 are sequential, and 3 are concurrent. Sequential mixed methods explanatory design, and the sequential mixed methods exploratory design, the sequential mixed methods transformative design. In the first type of design, you start with quantitative methods, and then you back it up with a qualitative method. In the second one, it is exploratory. You start with the qualitative, and then you back it up with a quantitative research. In the transformative one, you start with the results of the quant, then you transform it into, you start another one. Concerning the concurrent triangulation, mixed methods design, again, we can distinguish between 3 research designs. Concurrent mixed methods triangulation design, in which you mix both qualitative and quantitative research methods in the data gathering, in the analysis, and in the interpretation. Or concurrent mixed methods nested design, and the concurrent mixed methods transformative design. These are the types of designs that any researcher who wants to opt for a mixed method study has to adopt for his or her research. But before addressing or before identifying these research designs, the researcher has to take some factors into consideration before deciding whether it is explanatory or exploratory, sequential or concurrent. These are, I think, 4 main factors or elements that the researcher has to take into consideration before mixing or blending both the qualitative and the quantitative research methods. The first one is timing. The researcher has to decide on the timing of mixing both the qualitative and the quantitative. That is to say, is it sequential or concurrent? What does the researcher want to do? Is it to start with the qualitative first and then the quantitative? Then it is sequential, exploratory design. Or can he start with the quantitative and then the qualitative as well? It is explanatory design. Or can he merge the two? It is a concurrent design. It depends. The weighting. Now you are dealing with both methods, qualitative and quantitative, but which is more important for you? Is it the qualitative or the quantitative in your research? And your research design, your research questions dictate that. Which one is prioritized over the other? Sometimes you use the quantitative research method as the main method you use in your research, but you back it up with a qualitative exploration. Sometimes it's the opposite, and sometimes you give them equal weight. Qualitative and quantitative research methods are given equal weight. They are the same. And the researcher, again, has to decide on mixing. That is to say, when and how the mixing takes place. Is it in the data collection? You can collect both data forms at the same time. Or you can collect both data forms separately. And in the analysis, do you analyze both data forms at the same time, or you analyze one of them and then the other comes after? And the same thing with the interpretation or the discussion of the findings. Do you interpret these findings at the same time or in a sequence? The last one factor that the researcher has to take into consideration is theorizing. The researcher has to decide whether his research is grounded in theory or is guided by a theoretical background. These aspects, you can start from these aspects and then you can choose your research design, whether it is sequential or concurrent, etc. Another very important aspect in methodology is sampling, which I consider really very challenging. Because to select, I am using the language of methodology, to select from a large population a representative sample is really fraught with many difficulties and uncertainties, because your findings, your conclusions, your inferences you draw from your findings, you have to what extent they are generalizable. And there are a lot of types of sampling, starting from simple random sampling, stratified sampling, and then the ones that score the lowest are the convenience sampling and purposive sampling, which most of researchers choose because they are very easily, the most convenient person, then you can access only the people who are convenient. But to what extent your results are representative when you use this type of sampling? And then, in the methodological part, you have to decide on your instruments. What are the instruments you can use to collect your data? Are you using a questionnaire, or focus group interview, or an observation, or thematic analysis, or a narrative studies, or what? Deciding on the instruments is a prerequisite in the methodological part. Now that you have your instruments, what is coming is really more important than the previous one. Now you have your instruments, and you want to collect your data. You have to pre-test the validity and the reliability of your instruments, because, as I said, the conclusions you draw from your research should be representative, valid, reliable, honest, trustworthy. Otherwise, all what you have been doing so far is just garbage in, garbage out. there is no validity, they are not reliable, which means that validity and reliability are very, very important and a prerequisite. Testing them is a prerequisite. There are different methods to test the validity of your instrument, and there are different types of validity: content validity, construct validity, criterion validity, etc. And in its old-fashioned definition, validity is the extent to which your instrument measures what it intends to measure. You have to make sure that your instrument measures exactly what you want to measure. And as I said, there are different ways of testing validity. When it comes to reliability, you have, how can I say, now you have your instrument. You have your questionnaire, for example, and in the questionnaire there are scales, and in the scale there are items. To what extent, for example, you adopt a scale from a particular scholar, to what extent the scale you adopted to your study, in the Moroccan context, for example, is a reliable one. Another researcher used it in the States or in England, and you want to adopt it in the Moroccan context. You cannot take it and adopt it as it is. But you have to test. There is no harm in taking the items or the scales, etc. But there is a big harm in not measuring or testing the reliability of your instrument. For example, you have different items measuring the same thing, the same variable, and then you have to pilot your study. You have to administer a number between 30 and 50 participants, and then you measure to what extent all the items measure the same thing. To what extent they are. There is an inter-item and item total correlation between the items, which means that they measure the same thing. And the most commonly useful or used way to measure reliability is the Cronbach's alpha. This has to do with statistics. Any item in your instrument that loads less than 0.07 should be dropped from the instrument. And any item that loads 0.07 and more should be kept and is thus considered reliable. This is why reliability. And then when you make sure that your instruments are reliable, then you can go on and conduct the main study. But unless you make sure that your instruments are valid and reliable, you should not go ahead and do the main study. As a conclusion, because of time constraints, these are the main questions that your methodological part has to answer. The first one is, what was done exactly? You have to tell your reader, as a researcher, what was done and what are you going to do in your research exactly. How was it done? I mean, the different procedures you are going to pass through, and why was this approach chosen but not other approaches. The next one is, with whom did you undertake the research? That is to say, your research participants. And the next one is the instruments, methods used, etc. And how was the data collected and collated. This is only a very sketchy presentation about the importance of methodology. More and more important things, I think, will come with coming events, inshallah. Thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Dries is very humble and modest, and he calls it sketchy. I would call it very dense and very informative. And I would rather say it's a very rigorous and very scientific presentation. Research methods, indeed, are so important in conducting research, either when you are writing a paper or when you are writing an article or whatever. So without following these rigorous steps, your writing cannot be scholarly. The last speaker is Sehmet Shueri, whom I would call one of the solid pillars of the department and of course the master's program. And he has been so helpful and let's say constructive, particularly in this technical side of the master's program. This is teaching research methods, teaching scholarly writing, teaching statistics. All these subjects are so dense, so demanding, and yet he has always been saying yes to such challenges. His topic will be about how to write a review of literature. So please, Ahmed, go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here among, of course, colleagues and some ex-students, some friends with whom I had a long relationship. And one of them is Sidris. So I met him first as a trainee, and now I meet him again as a researcher, and I hope that we will be colleagues again in the future. Professor Merki somehow said what I want to say, is that this is for the students. So bear with me, sometimes if you feel that I'm using somehow technical jargon, I will try and stop if you need some clarification, but I will be at the same time swift, and because it seems that we feel sleepy now. Now, I start with a very simple thing, is that the way I'm going to present this afternoon, it's like, a lesson that I give in the classroom, because this is meant for the students, mainly S6 students. And of course, master students who are familiar with what I'm presenting this afternoon, because we already had a lesson which is similar to this, okay? I start with a general overview of the things that I will cover, and as you can see, it's based on sort of questions. And the slides will be sort of answers to the questions. Of course, I will receive questions at the end, and I hope that I will receive as many as possible. I cannot answer all the questions because, this is a huge issue, and just listening to Sidris, you feel that if Aziz said, don't get scared, I think Sidris scared you, indeed. Because when you think of all this, all the requirements, all the norms, the conventions, of course, of research and research methods and skills, I think you need a lot of time, at least just to get familiar with, before you can digest and use later on. So I will start with a general overview of what is literature review. How do I search for the literature? How should I structure my literature, and general guidelines, okay? So, the first thing that I start with is a message I received last Friday with a student who is perhaps in here. He or she is not the problem. The problem is that this is a student, unless 6 student, on Facebook. And this is what he or she said to me. I can say that it is not easy at all. I'm really confused about many things. Also, there is no support from the supervisor. And I said, confused about what? Then he or she said, sources, ideas, how to avoid plagiarism. Right. Just please don't get scared as students, because this is something, an experience that all novice researchers go through. And as you see, I took an example from a textbook by a researcher from another country, and this country is a country where research methods is so common indeed. It starts even at the high school, and then of course at the undergraduate level. Most common things encountered by what we call novice researchers are things like, nothing has been written on my research topic. I'm sure that you have this feeling as students. Or, there is too much. Okay. I just click on the internet and I get a million references. How can I cope with all this? or it's all been done, nothing has been left to me. I get short of ideas, perhaps. Then, how many references do I need to include in my study? So, if you want more information, just see here the source in there. Now, I did it on purpose. I'm using the APA documentation style, and this is just to tell you, when you write your review of the list, make sure that your documentation style is very precise and very accurate. Otherwise, you fall into the problem of flaws here and there, or inconsistencies. So, why do students face so many difficulties at this level? There are many ideas, and these are some of the things that I came across. According to Boot and Bale, current initiatives and faculty functions here ignore the centrality of the literature review in research preparation. I think that my presentation should have been presented before yours, because we have the review of the literature chronologically speaking, and then comes the methods. Then there is a too narrow conception of the literature review as merely an exhaustive summary of what has been done before. There is a misunderstanding of its role within a study. So what is a literature review? I have two examples in here. The first one is a literature review is a written summary of journal articles, books, other documents. Of course, when I say these might include even presentations by teachers or conferences of what has been done in the past, and to show the current state of information about the topic that you are dealing with. Now, it also organizes the literature into subtopics and documents the need for the proposed study. It is the first place, indeed, for you as a researcher, where you do what? You show at least two things: the breadth of your knowledge and the depth. Okay? So, I mean, when you show the depth, you show that, yes, I can tackle the topic, I can deal with it in a deep, or at a deep level. Now, according to other scholars, it is a place, or it is the basis of your own study, and it should be, in general, well written, because it relates your study to what has been done before. It fills a gap, or highlights it sometimes. It indicates what has been done, and then it frames, it acts as the basis of comparing and contrasting your findings with previous findings. Now, what are the uses of the research literature? It's not always just in a study like this for a dissertation or, for example, a thesis. It's done for different, of course, types of, like, I would say, to write a proposal for funding. So this is a different objective. Maybe to write a proposal for a degree. Maybe to identify effective research. And if you see the last one, I will not go over all these points. It's just perhaps sometimes to satisfy a personal curiosity. So, some of the roles and purposes of the literature. There are many. So as not, again, to waste a lot of time, just I will cover some of the points. It is sort of, a researcher cannot perform significant research without first understanding the literature in the field. Not understanding prior research clearly puts you at a disadvantage. If you have a look at the last point, a researcher cannot perform significant research without first understanding the literature in the field. So it can be also used to establish the present condition of the field, to provide a rationale, to enable you to make a claim for originality, to clarify relevant concepts and theories, and to set up again, as I said, comparisons. Now, a question that I always receive is the review of the literature always the same for quantitative studies and qualitative studies? It's not. And I would just highlight one of the points in there. The first point at the horizontal level. For the quantitative research in general, the review of the literature should be substantial. But for the qualitative ones, it's somehow minimal in comparison. Then, as you go down, you find always there are differences between the two. It justifies or documents this is similar, but as you go down, it confirms or disconfirms prior predictions from the literature, but the other one supports or modifies. Now, how do I search for the literature? Okay, any comments or any question at this level before I proceed? How do I do it? How do you do it as students? Anyone? Well, I think that Aziz presented some of, or gave some of the tips. Go into the library. Now, I have some, at least tips in here, and one of them, you should identify the key terms. Why I identify the key terms? For example, if I want to Google that, I just use the key terms and just start my search for the literature. So I can locate the literature, I can critically evaluate and select the literature for the review. I can organize the literature that I have selected, and I can write at the end the literature based on this. Now, one of the things is that what type of literature should I use? Most of the time students go and base their search for the literature on books. I would say it's better to focus on journals. And then when you choose journals, make sure that the journal that you are using are reliable and credible. So if you have a look at this example in here, you see that there are some tips that can help you. Like, for example, the people, their affiliation, the degrees they have, etc. And then if there is a DOI, for example, a digital object identifier, if the site is credible or not, etc. Here is another example again. Now, some examples where you can find some journal articles are like this, but there are so many. I'm just giving an example like Sage Publications, which is well known. Now, when I'm searching for the literature, and I get, for example, some journals or books, etc., I need what we call a strategy, a technique of working. One of them is I can take notes, or I can use what we call abstracts. Here is an example of an abstract that you can use. This is a sample that you can follow. You can use your own way. But if you have a look at this, maybe I have sometimes 50 pages or more. Then what I can do, I can summarize everything and make it into one page. And I should just be sure to include some of the pieces of information that I need later on when I'm writing my review of the literature. When I cite, just to be accurate enough, I need things like clear names. So as you said in there, I put the family name and the first initial, then the date, of course the title of the article, and then other things like the journal, the pages, etc. And then I start with a general idea about the problem, then hypotheses or research questions, and a paragraph on the data and results. How many paragraphs do you have in there? Let's say 4. So the whole article can become just 4 pages. And by the end, I end up with some 50 pages, which perhaps represent 50 studies that have been done before. Now, ways to determine the credibility of a source or a resource. So, I have to pay attention to if that article comes from a journal which has what we call a review or a peer review board, if it has quality, if it has standards before publishing, and if not, I take that journal and check with a faculty member. I go to a teacher, perhaps my supervisor, and ask about if this is really reliable, if this is really credible. Aziz gave the example a few minutes ago of while working on the internet. What can I do? If I'm working, if I'm checking out the library, what can I do, etc., etc. There are things that can help me, and of course, one of them is that I always check for these. If the journal has what we call a good reputation or not. You gave the example of Wikipedia. I do not trust it.